So what is the Mavericks ceiling this year? Dallas, to me, has a shot of making the NBA Finals. Not just the Western Conference Finals, but the NBA Finals. And of course, that has to do with who they face, what side of the bracket they're going to be on. That matters more than anything. Who do the Mavs match up well with? You can make an argument that they can match up with anybody. They can match up well with the Thunder. They can match up well with Minnesota now that they have more bigs. They can overtake the Timberwolves. Sacramento, same thing. Now Dallas has the size to match them. They have the shooting to match them. They also have the playmaker in Luka Doncic to match them. If there's any team that can skyrocket these West standings, I believe it is the Dallas Mavericks. This is such a shift from where they were earlier in the year based on how the Mavs can play with this group. If they're healthy and if Jason Kidd gets these rotations right, they can make the NBA Finals. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Control Room. I'm your host, Esrael Johannes. Now, we've made it to the NBA Finals, and somehow the Dallas Mavericks are still dancing. Yes, after all that, the Mavs take down the Timberwolves. In the Western Conference Finals, the series finished 4-1. We're going to take a look at how that series ended, and then we'll take a look at the Eastern Conference Finals and see how Boston swept Indiana, and then see if Boston has any weaknesses. Spoiler alert, not very many. And then I will give my official NBA Finals prediction as we get ready for Game 1 on Thursday. So let's go back to Timberwolves-Mavs Game 3. There's plenty of stats that I want to get to in terms of the historic nature of what these stats are in Games 3, 4, and 5. Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving each scored 33 points in Game 3. They combined for 66 points. At the time, that was the second most this postseason, currently the third most after Game 5. The Mavericks shot 24 of 40 from 2, that's 60%. And inside the paint, they shot 20 of 33, 60.6% paint FG. That's something that we're going to keep looking at as we get down the line into the Boston series. From 3, they shot 14 of 28, which is 50%. The Mavs are 5-1 in playoff franchise history when shooting 50% from 3 or better on 25 or more three-point field goal attempts. And if you bring that down to 20 three-point attempts, that record is 9-1. From the free throw line, they shot 26 of 31, 83.9%, and they're 16-6 in playoff franchise history when shooting 83.9% or better from the free throw line on 30 attempts or more. All that to say, lots of great stuff from the Mavs on a shooting perspective. On the Timberwolves side, however, not so great. They shot 9 of 30% from three-point land. The Wolves are 4-5 in the regular season when shooting 30% or worse from 3. It's the third game this postseason at or below 30%, but only their first loss. The Wolves are 6-17 in playoff franchise history when shooting 30% from 3 or worse. And then one of the things that I've talked about with the Wolves is that they haven't been able to generate points off turnovers despite having volume in opponent turnovers. This game, Game 3, they scored 10 points off 14 Dallas turnovers. It was the third straight game scoring fewer than 1 point per opponent turnover. Minnesota averaged 17 points off turnovers per game in the regular season. So this is not their identity. They normally get points off turnovers, but they have had trouble against the Mavericks and will have continued to have trouble in this category. Karl Anthony Towns, probably his worst game in a long time. 14 points, 5 of 18 from the floor, 27.8%, 0 of 8 from 3, 4 of 5, 80% from the free throw line, 11 rebounds and 3 assists. This was the first game in his career, regular or postseason, where he missed all of at least 8 three-point field goal attempts. Never happened before. Never seen it. He's never taken at least 8 shots from 3 and missed them all until Game 3. And Also in this game, he need Derek Lively the second in the head. So what a game for him. All right, moving on to game 4. Luka had 28 points on 7 of 21 shooting, 33.3%, 4 of 11 from 3, 36.4%, 10 of 12 from the free throw line, 83.3%, 15 rebounds, 10 assists, and a steal. It was his 9th career playoff triple-double, 7th career 25-plus point triple-double, which ties him at the most all-time among players aged 25 or younger with Oscar Robertson. And he's still going. He gets one more with 25. He's at the top of the list. It was also his 6th triple-double this postseason, which tied the second most in a single postseason in NBA history. Jokic has the most in a postseason with 10 last year when the Denver Nuggets won the championship. The Mavs as a team from 3 shot 8 of 19 in the first half, which is 42%. With that percentage, it's indicative that, okay, you can continue shooting the 3 like that in the second half. But they only shot 6 of 21, which was 29% in the second half. What was worse was that they shot 3 of 12, 25% in the fourth quarter, and they were 0 for 5 from 3 in the clutch. Not really normal. Their three-point rate was 49.4%. They got away from themselves in this game. Let's take a look at where they were from 2 and from the free throw line. From 2, they shot 20 of 41, which was 48.8%. In the paint, they shot 18 of 33, which is 54.5%. And then from the free throw line, they shot 18 of 21, which is 85.7%. So below their averages from 2 and in the paint. They did well at the free throw line. They just didn't have a good shooting night. Points off turnovers, however. They scored 30 points off 15 Minnesota turnovers. That's the most in playoff franchise history since Sport Radar started tracking this stat in 2018-2019. They can query back to the beginning of the play-by-play era, 96-97, but for some reason, when I do this myself, I can only go back to Luka's rookie season. The 30 points off turnovers ties the 12th most in a game across all teams. And somehow Minnesota found a way to win this game. But here is probably why. They shot 39 of 74, which is 52.7%. 11 of 24 from 3, 45.8%. And somehow from the free throw line, 16 of 25, only 64%. Their field goal percentage and three-point field goal percentage, 52.7% and 45.8% respectively, were the best in a game this postseason for the Wolves. And then their 25 free throw attempts were the second most free throw attempts this series. They had a plus 10 point differential in the paint. And if I was able to individually look at this split in the playoffs for the Wolves in 2024, they were 7-1 when matching or outscoring opponents in the paint, but only 2-6 when outscored in the paint. And that includes Game 5. Speaking of which, in Game 5, the Mavericks ended the first quarter on a 17-1 run. If you're the Wolves, that's not what you want to do. The Mavs also ended the second quarter on a 17-4 run. At this point, like Jason Kidd said on the Stephen A. Smith Show, Luka tried to end this series at halftime. The Mavs led by as many as 36 points. And get this, I don't know if anyone has said this stat yet. That was the largest deficit in Timberwolves postseason franchise history in the play-by-play era. The Wolves have never been down at any point in their playoff lives since they started tracking deficits within a game. As many points as they were down from Dallas. 36. I don't need to say more to that. Let's find out why. Luka just went maniacal. He had 36 points on 14 of 22 shooting, 63.6% from the floor. From 3, he shot 6 of 10, 60%. 10 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals. He became the 12th player, and this was the 12th game in NBA playoff history with 35 or more points, 63.6% shooting from the floor, and 60% from three on 10 or more three-point field goal attempts. Yes, that's a little cherry-picked, but my goodness, we want to know, how often does somebody do that to a team? 12 times. That's your answer. He had 20 points in the first quarter. He outscored Minnesota by himself in the first quarter. Minnesota had 19. Luka Doncic had 20. Does this ring a bell? I think somewhere in Death Valley, you can hear the screams of the dead. Luka's 20 points in the first quarter were the second most in any quarter in his playoff career. He's had 21 before in the fourth quarter against the LA Clippers. It was the most in any first quarter in his playoff career. He became the 6th player in NBA playoff history to lead a team in points, rebounds, and assists entering the NBA Finals. He currently leads all players in the playoffs in total points, rebounds, assists, steals, field goals made, three-point field goals made, free throws made, double-doubles, and triple-doubles this season. Yeah, 9 different categories. Luka Doncic is leading everybody. Now, I did say total. He's played 17 games, which ties the most for a player in this postseason. However, Luka Doncic is the first in NBA history to even do that. So hats off to our resident Slovenian. Let's go to his dynamic duo partner in Kyrie Irving, who also had 36 points to go along with Luka's 36 points. That's 72 combined points, which was the most this postseason, and the 5th most in the regular and postseason since Kyrie had been traded to Dallas. It was the 3rd game with both players scoring 30 or more points in this series. It ties the 2nd most games in a series in NBA playoff history. Elgin Baylor and Jerry West of the Los Angeles Lakers were the only duo to ever do this. They did this in 4 games where both players each scored 30. In the 1962 NBA Finals versus Boston, and they did it in 3 games in the 1966 West Divisional Finals versus St. Louis. All right, let's go down to our rookie now, Derek Lively II, who shot 16 of 16 from the floor in the Western Conference Finals. That's the most field goals made without a miss in a series in NBA playoff history. He's currently shooting 52 of 78, which is 66.7% this postseason. That's the best field goal percentage by a rookie on 50 or more field goal attempts. And so if that percentage holds through the finals, Derek Lively will have had the most efficient shooting performance of any rookie in NBA playoff history. His plus minus is currently sitting at plus 108 in the playoffs. That's the 2nd best plus minus by a rookie in NBA playoff history, behind only Manu Ginobili with the San Antonio Spurs, who was a plus 191 when the Spurs won the NBA championship in 2003. So Derek Lively is 2nd at plus 108. Chet Holmgren was in 3rd at plus 75. And then if you look at the Mavs starting 5, this has been a key point of contention when talking about how the Mavs have performed throughout the entirety of the season. Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, Derek Jones Jr., PJ Washington Jr., and Daniel Gafford. They're now 27-6 in the regular season and the playoffs since their first start together on March 7th versus the Miami Heat. And in the playoffs, they're 12-5. They basically started every game together. All right. Now that we've taken care of all those stats from the Western Conference Finals, there's an opponent that the Mavs are looking ahead to, and that's the Boston Celtics. We need to take a quick look as to how they took down Indiana and see if there's any way for the Mavs to overtake the C's. Let's take a look at the Eastern Conference Finals between Boston and Indiana real quick. The story of the series came down to 2 categories: turnovers and clutch execution. The Indiana Pacers had 15.8 turnovers per game in the Eastern Conference Finals. That was the third most in a conference finals or later in franchise history. And they had 3.0 player turnovers per game in the clutch in the Eastern Conference Finals, which ties the third most all-time in a series with 3 or more clutch games played in the play-by-play era. So the last 27 years. Then if you look at the clutch, Boston, in terms of scoring, had 15.7 clutch points per game. That's a lot in a 5-minute span. Efficiency shooting, well, not shooting, but efficiency rankings. The Celtics had a 127 clutch offensive rating that led the league. 89.7 clutch defensive rating, that's second, and a 37.3 clutch net rating, that also led the league. There's no other story to tell when it comes to how Indiana performed. Everyone knew, yes, Tyrese Halliburton was gone those last 2 games with the hamstring injury, unfortunately. But they had chances 3 different times despite losing them all. And it came down to those last few minutes where, yeah, I don't think Dallas is going to have that kind of an issue down the stretch, as they've been one of the best clutch teams this season. But it's still worth noting that no matter who Boston's opponent is, they're now figuring out ways. If we're down, we're going to find a way to come back. If we've been dealing with these runs, we're going to find a way to come back. That's something that you can't scoff at, even against Indiana. There is a dilemma with the Boston Celtics. How do you take down a team of that caliber? When the season started, I had Boston winning it all. Their traditional stats, they score 120.6 points per game. That's the second most in the NBA this year. They have 1,351 three-point field goals made. That led the league. And the next most was Golden State with 1,211. That's 143s more than the next most. From 3, they shot 38.8%, which was second in the NBA. They had 46.3 rebounds per game. That was also second in the NBA. And they led the league in blocks at 6.6. Their efficiency ratings, 122.2 offensive rating, which led the league, 110.6 defensive rating, which was second in the NBA, and an 11.7 net rating, which was also first in the NBA. And this is across the regular season. They're shooting by zone. They shoot 43.1% from 3 in the corner. That's where the Mavs like to operate. But this is also where the Boston Celtics love to operate. The 43.1% three-point field goal percentage from the corner led the league. That was first in the NBA. In the restricted area, the Celtics shoot 70.3%, which was fourth in the NBA. But get this, Dallas is in third at 70.7%. And then you look at the depth of the Celtics. They have a 6.2 bench net rating, which is first in the NBA. And they also have 3 players with 20 or more points per game this season in Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Kristaps Porzingis, who has been confirmed to be available for Game 1 as of this morning. I'm recording this on Wednesday, the day before Game 1. Now let's take a look at how the Mavs and the Celtics have both played in the playoffs. That is important to know going into the NBA Finals. The paint defense for both teams. Dallas allowed 51.1% in the paint, which was the third best paint defense this postseason. And they allowed 42.7 paint points per game, which was the fourth lowest in the NBA. Boston, on the other hand, allowed 56.9% in the paint, which was seventh in the NBA. And keep in mind, there are 16 teams in the NBA playoffs. And they allowed 46.4 paint points per game, which was 10th in the NBA. That's the bottom half. Now, I do want to credit the Dunker Spot for this tip. I was watching Stephen Nikias' episode of their NBA Finals preview, and they talked about Kristaps Porzingis in the post, and so I wanted to dig in some of these numbers. Dallas allows 1.16 points per possession, which is 15th in the NBA. What that means is that Dallas allows the second most points per possession on post-up plays. They allowed 0.98 points per possession in the regular season. And generally, let's think about it. If you haven't really used that metric before, 1 point per possession, you normally can get to 100 possessions. They're not always going to end in a field goal attempt. They might end in a turnover. However, you normally get to about 100 possessions per game. Let's just say that for staying even. When you generate 1 point per possession, you generate 100 points in a game. And so you would like to be above 1 rather than below if you're on the offense. If you're on defense, you want to allow below 1 instead of allowing more than 1. In this case, Dallas allows a bit more than they'd like to in the post. And why does that matter? Because Kristaps Porzingis is now available. He accounted for 3.2 of Boston's 8.1 post-up possessions per game in the regular season. That's 39.5% of all of Boston's post-up possessions going to Kristaps Porzingis. And he had a 1.30 points per possession, which led the NBA for every player that had a minimum of 3 or more. A minimum of 3 post-up possessions. He also shot 62.3% from the floor on those post-ups. In the playoffs, there's not as much of a sample size because he only played against Miami. He's been dealing with that calf injury since the end of that series and hasn't played since. So small sample size, only 4 games. But he's scoring 1.09 points per possession on 2.8 post-up possessions per game in the playoffs and shooting only 42.9% on those post-ups. It's something for Dallas to look at when it comes to defending, because if Kristaps is able to get you on an island based on how you're playing defense and how they run the pick and roll, if KP is alone and he's got a smaller defender on him, and he's close enough to the basket, which is basically free throw line and closer, the Mavs are going to have a little bit of trouble, because if you try to put 2 on the ball there, he's just going to kick it out. If you don't, he's going to score on you. That's why his availability matters, in my opinion, more than anybody else. I mean, obviously Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, but for an X factor, Kristaps Porzingis is the biggest one for the Celtics. From 3, Dallas made 12.6 threes and attempted 33.9 threes, shooting 37.2% from 3. Their shot type, this was interesting to me. They shot 38.4% on catch-and-shoot threes, which was 5th in the NBA, and 34.3% on pull-up threes, which was 4th in the NBA. And I wanted to take a look at the windows when it came to defending. How tight does a defender have to be? Because I believe it was January that I mentioned this stat, where the Mavs were making more of their threes when a defender was within 4 to 6 feet of them versus when they were 6 or more feet away. So I wanted to see if that still held true. Not necessarily so much, but this was the odd part. When the nearest defender is 2 to 4 feet away, which the NBA defines as tight coverage, or just a tight window, that is, the Mavs are shooting 39.5% at a 5.4% frequency. Now, that 39.5% leads the league. When the nearest defender is 4 to 6 feet away, which the NBA defines as open, the Mavs shoot 34.7%, which is 8th, and that's at a 16% frequency. But when the threes are wide open, which is 6 or more feet away for the nearest defender, the Mavs shoot 38.5%, which is ninth, at a 19.4% frequency. So for some reason, the Mavs seem to do well when the coverage is tight, and they do well when the defender leaves them wide open. For some reason, that happy medium is no longer their sweet spot. Boston, on the other hand, shoots 14.6, or they make 14.6 threes per game. They attempt 39.8 threes per game. Sounds like the Dallas Mavericks of old. And they shoot 36.8% from three in the postseason. On their shot type splits, they shoot 39.2% on catch and shoot threes, which is third in the NBA, and 33.3% on pull-up threes, which is eighth in the NBA. So they don't convert those as well as they do. But, I mean, no team does, really. Let's take a look again at the nearest defender splits. 2 to 4 feet, tight. That is 24.1%, which is 12th, at a 7.1% frequency. That is the sweet spot for Dallas right there. I'll get back to that in just a moment. From 4 to 6 feet, 37.9%, which is third, 21.8% frequency. So most of the shots are seeming to come from that window. And then when the Celtics are wide open, 40.6% from three at an 18.5% frequency. So the Celtics get better the further away a defender is. Shocker, that's how it's kind of supposed to be. But that 24.1% when the nearest defender is that tight on you, that is a key for how the Mavericks need to play defense against the Celtics. If they can get to their matchup as soon as they catch the ball, right? Because when you get to a ball handler matters just as much as how well you defend them when they're in their motion and their action. So there's that little window of when you're talking about, you guard them on the catch, you get to them on the catch. That allows you to then be within 2 to 4 feet so that if they do try to take a three, it's not going to be as great. And that might help the Mavs if the Celtics get to 3 happy. Speaking of which, let's look at the three-point defense overall. The Mavericks allowed 35.6% from three. Boston has only allowed 33.8% from three. And Boston has really taken away the corner threes, which the Mavericks are shooting over 40% in this postseason. That is something to look forward to as well as to how these two teams are going to play this chess match. How are they going to get the corner threes? How are they going to eliminate these corner threes? But the way that you defend Boston's threes is probably going to be one of the more important stats to look at. Again, anytime you hold the team under 25% from three in a certain situation, you want to replicate that situation over and over if you're the defense. Can Boston's three-point indulgence change the series? I've mentioned before how much I lament living and dying by the three. Now, again, I'm going to mention one more time, if attempts are even, 60% from two and 40% from three would cancel each other out mathematically. Boston has a 47.1% three-point rate this season, and in the playoffs, that number is now 47.4%, both of the highest in the NBA. This, again, cherry-picked, but I'm looking for any possible weakness for the Celtics. The Celtics in the regular season and the playoffs are 6-8 when held under 37.5% from three, with a three-point rate that is under 45%. Which means, I looked at the record, when they do have a three-point rate that's higher than 45%, it's ridiculous. If they take so many threes that it's basically half of their shots, they're probably going to win that game. So it's important for the Mavericks, yes, defend the three. If Boston gets to 3 happy and they miss, let them continue to shoot that and see if they can continue missing. But at some point, Boston is going to wake up. And once they take that many threes, some will start to go in. They're just that good of a shooting team. So there's a sweet spot when it comes to how many threes you want the Celtics to take. Speaking of which, the Celtics are 2-6 if the three-point rate is between 40 and 45%. And that's while the three-point field goal percentage is under 37.5%. 37.5% is actually a lot of threes. That's about 3 of 8 shooting. And that's about the marker when you have a sharpshooter on your team. 38% is where you want them to be. So let's say the Mavs held them to under that. The further down that's going to be, while the three-point rate is consistent, that will open the window for the Mavs to utilize their offense in a way where they can overtake what Boston wants to do rather than what they are doing, if that makes sense. But that margin for error for Dallas is so much smaller than it is for Boston. Boston has to know that this is the game plan. We're really just going to have to take it game by game at this point. So let's revisit the conference finals predictions before we get to the NBA finals prediction. Just for a recap, in the Eastern Conference Finals between the number 1 Celtics and the number 6 Pacers, I had the Celtics winning in 7. The Celtics ended up sweeping, winning in 4. And then in the Western Conference Finals between the number 3 Timberwolves and the number 5 Mavericks, I had the Mavericks winning in 6. The Mavericks ended up winning in 5. So both teams correct again. Obviously, the games that were played did not have the right number, but I didn't see Tyrese Halliburton getting injured. I didn't see Indiana blowing leads, losing the clutch. I didn't think Minnesota would put up less of a fight. That was a surprise. But the teams that I had predicted to move on, once these matchups were set, they're the ones that we see in the NBA Finals. And now we have made it to the segment where I give you my prediction for who will be crowned the 2024 NBA champion. That's coming up next. The next episode will be a recap of Games 1 and 2 of the NBA Finals. I will not be able to record an episode between the first 2 games, but I will be able to get one after Game 2, before Game 3. And I did mention in the previous episode that Nancy Lieberman was going to be featured with an episode. Because we didn't actually talk about the playoffs together. The most current event that we did talk about was the WNBA. I'm going to move her episode after the finals are over. That way, her episode doesn't get buried within all the NBA Finals content. And considering after the finals, what we're probably going to be paying most attention to is the WNBA as well as the NBA draft. That will probably be the best time for her episode, especially because she's coaching the Big Three, and the Big Three will start up this summer again. That will probably be a better time to get that episode out rather than in the middle of all of this NBA Finals talk. So next episode, be ready for a Game 1 and Game 2 recap. The NBA Finals schedule, all games will be on ABC. Game 1 is Thursday, June 6th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Game 2 will be Sunday, June 9th at 8 p.m. Eastern. Game 3, Wednesday, June 12th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Game 4 will be Friday, June 14th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Now, if necessary, games 5, 6, and 7. Game 5 will be Monday, June 17th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Game 6 will be Thursday, June 20th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. And Game 7 would be Sunday, June 23rd at 8 p.m. Eastern. And we are no longer doing the 2-3-2 format. That has no longer been a thing for about 9 or 10 years at this point. So it will be 2-2-1-1-1, which means the first 2 games will be in Boston. Games 3 and 4 will be in Dallas. Game 5 in Boston. Game 6 in Dallas. And Game 7 in Boston, because Boston has home court advantage through the playoffs. Now, the time has come for an NBA Finals prediction, and I have been torn for over a week as to where I think this is going to go. Between the number 1 Celtics and the number 5 Mavericks, I have the Boston Celtics winning in 6 games. I do think the Mavericks' run ends here. However, there is an opportunity for them to steal a game in Boston and flip the series on its head. I'm not counting the Mavericks out of winning this series, but again, the margin for error is much smaller for Dallas than it is for Boston. And with Boston being this close to the ultimate goal after failing as many times as they have, but most excruciatingly last year and the year before, I don't think that they're going to let this one slip. However, Luka Doncic is the best player on the floor. That is universally recognized. So it's going to be a matter of execution. Who is going to outplay the other team? And that is going to determine the series. But on paper, based on how I've analyzed this game all season long, how I've used these numbers to break down what I think is going to happen on the floor, and past history determining future behavior, I think the Celtics will win this in 6. All right. That's it for this episode. We've made it to the NBA Finals. Thanks again for listening. Thanks again for watching. I really appreciate the feedback and the constant growth that this audience has garnered. It's been the joy of a lifetime. So thanks again. That does it for me. This has been The Control Room. I'm your host, Esrael Johannes, signing off.